When I was a kid, we had this thing called the generation gap. It was a thing that the media discovered to explain the emergence of youth culture and the huge cultural change that occurred in the late 60s and early 70s, hippies, flower power, the anti-Vietnam movement, and this became a big focus of media commentary at the time. In more recent times, it's become really popular in the media to target particular generations and to accuse them of all kinds of crimes and misdemeanours and to be the source of all of the society's woes. My own generation, the baby boomers, cop it all the time. We're constantly being claimed as to be self-indulgent, selfish, we want it all, we're spending our kids' inheritance and so forth. A lot of stuff in the media talks about how lucky we were, that we had free entrance to universities, for example, and all of the young people who've come after us have been busily being hit with all kinds of imposts and fees for things like university education that we didn't have to pay for, and therefore that's all terribly unfair and appalling. Now this stuff, of course, is complete nonsense because it misses a much wider picture. The wider picture is that the whole society's living standards and affluence have improved enormously since I was a young person. And although I and some other people did get free university education, we were part of only a very small percentage of our generation, probably only around 10%. So when you think about baby boomers and complain about them getting free university education, remember that you're only talking about a pretty small minority of baby boomers. The vast bulk of them didn't even go to university. The proportion of young people who go to university these days is much, much higher. It's also worth keeping in mind that the overall living standards that we had when we were growing up were far more basic than the average young person today has. Not only did we not have all of the gadgetry, all of the cheap and wonderful things from iPods and mobile phones and fantastic stereo systems and all the different entertainment things and games and electronic wizardry that young people now take for granted, most of us actually grew up in pretty basic circumstances, even those of us like me who came from fairly middle-class backgrounds. The house I grew up in didn't get proper electricity till I was about 7. We used to have an ice chest. Our heating was basically a fireplace and an old wooden stove, and there was no such thing as air conditioning. We had a septic tank, we had no natural gas, and there was no made roads running by our house. That was just in an ordinary country town. So they were the kind of living standards for baby boomers, most baby boomers growing up. Our whole society's got more affluent. Our whole level of living standards has increased enormously over that time, and younger people, along with everybody else, have benefited. So the notion that somehow baby boomers were living on the fat of the land and had it fantastic, and now people who are much younger are doing it really tough and it's all very unfair, is frankly just rubbish. But recent attacks on Generation Y and complaining that they're battening on their parents, which are kind of the obverse, the opposite of the attacks on the baby boomers, are equally stupid. The suggestion that somehow younger people who are staying at home well into their 20s or even beyond because they have difficulty buying a house or because they want to basically focus on living it up or travelling or having a good life or whatever, I think are equally fatuous. There's enormous diversity of circumstances out there. There's lots of different situations. There's lots of young people who've moved out of home pretty early. There's some who have hung around for a while, sometimes for very good reason. We should be careful to avoid the cheap generalisations that you so often get in the Australian media that are a substitute for serious reporting and serious analysis, and no more so than in this area. There's huge diversity within our population, within different age groups in our population, and therefore we shouldn't get sucked into these stupid, cheap generalisations. Yes, there are some baby boomers out there who are skiing, it's called, spending the kids' inheritance. There are some who are buying camper vans and travelling around Australia and spending it up big. Today Tonight and The Current Affair managed to find a few to show how irresponsible they are, but for every one of those there'll be dozens, hundreds who are just living ordinary, decent, normal lives, building up assets in the hope that they will be able to pass on some of it to their kids and that it will help in funding their retirement. Most baby boomers don't have good provision for their retirement. Most baby boomers don't have decent superannuation provision because they entered the system too late to really build up an appropriate asset base. They will struggle. And keep in mind that most generations that preceded Generation X, Generation Y, didn't inherit much, if anything, from their parents either. So the notion that somehow any of us have some kind of entitlement to a huge inheritance from our parents is a very recent and, in my view, a very dubious notion. I don't agree with people squandering things on themselves at the expense of their kids, but I don't think many Australians do that, and I don't think we should be accusing whole generations, whole groups of people who happen to have been born at a particular time of doing that when it's only a very small proportion who are actually doing it. It makes great TV, but it's basically rubbish.